came here in the end, and just as he set foot in Eretz Yisrael, some sort of Muslim came along and lopped his head off. That's what I heard. I say legend because
We don't know his makom for us.
don't think so.
Do you know what we're up to? Oh, here we go.
Yes, I'll tell you where we're up to.
Thank you.
We are up in my book. We are up to 40 and 41. Okay. Now, just to
Would that be meaning like here?
paragraph 40-ish. Okay. So without doing a massive recap, just a little recap to. Okay, which was necessary for myself. Probably even more than for you, since I have to say the shir. So, where am I? Yeah, Monday, I think. But okay, so it goes like this. The fundamental thing that the Kuzari is trying to sell is that there's two kinds of religious concepts. Okay, you have the universal religion, and then you have the religion that arises out of experience. Right? Now, the universal religion obviously doesn't get very far unless you have some kind of universal constructs. So you're working on discovering what the basic axioms are for the universe, and then you use these axioms to intuit the existence of God, or perhaps the non-existence of God, or all sorts of other things. And then you use this to build a religious model for your life. You use this to build, shall we say, a meaningful life. The brilliant thing about the ancient philosophical tradition is that they did all of this without a personal God. This is so contemporary. You could market this stuff today, I think, because people on the one hand are yearning for a spiritual meaning for their lives, but they're not willing to believe that there's a God out there that actually cares whether I do this or who I live with or who I don't live with, or I don't want God to meddle in my affairs too much. Okay, but I do want to believe that my life has meaning. So what they did was they thought out a very coherent picture, which we've discussed numerous times, and roughly stated it is that God or no God, we don't know why God creates the world, and God doesn't care about the world because He doesn't really create it in a frame of mind where He says, okay, I'm doing this. God is, and therefore the universe is too, and it's like the relationship, as one Hasidic Rabbi put it, the relationship between a wall and the shadow that it casts on the ground. That's pretty much the relationship with God and the world. It's not an intentional thing. So to say that God cares about anything, or that He actually created anything in the sense of some sort of activity is not philosophically sound, because God never changes, and therefore God doesn't do anything, and He never does anything but be Himself. And therefore, the world never has a beginning in time, because if God never changes, then nothing ever changed, and whatever is. Okay, so the world has always been here. In any event, it's part of the nature of reality that everything that lives has some sort of ideal form that it's aspiring to become. Because without an ideal form, you don't have an identity, and without an identity, you don't have a life. Okay, so if you're a dog, okay, there's something doggy about you. There's something doggy about your life, and you aspire basically to be a dog. So there's an ideal concept of the dog, which is located somewhere in the sphere of the moon. Okay, and every dog aspires to be a dog, and and every human being, therefore, aspires to be a human being. Now, so if you talk about what is the essential definition of a human being, is a creature that is alive and has an intellect. And this intellect is used to cogitate, to know things. And therefore, a human being's purpose in life, its highest manifestation, is to know the nature of reality, which involves knowing something about or nothing about God, whichever way you want to take it. And if you possess this knowledge, then this knowledge gives you eternal existence, because the truth is eternal, as opposed to things that happen which are ephemeral. Okay, so you can actually evolve from being a corporeal human being that has some kind of relationship with his ideal, otherwise he wouldn't exist, into being an actualized human being who lives forever within the truth. And that's how it works. It's a beautiful model. It's quite coherent, and it might even be true. Okay, I'm not dissing it, and it's something that you could import into our age of meaninglessness and crisis, and do quite a bit with it, because, like Buddhism, for instance, it doesn't require the belief in a deity of any kind, or that intervenes in your life, or cares what you do. Right? The alternative to that, of course, is Judaism. Right? Now, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi goes and he kind of dismisses the two other religions. Okay, if I understand his critique, okay, basically what he's saying is that they presume to be universal because they don't have access to the original experiential core, because it never happened to them. So what they have to do is they have to try to take some information out of that experiential core, which, like I said, never really happened to them, and transmute this into some sort of universal religion, which therefore they can impose upon everybody in the world.
I think where I'm getting stuck is with the first model, there's no acknowledgement that there's just also, as rational as we are, and as much as we can understand, there's a limit to
Yes.
what we are capable.
Yes, there is, and the ultimate knowledge that sets you free, of course, is the knowledge that you don't know. Okay, so tachlit, and that by the way comes from Plato, and it actually, you'll find Hasidic Rebbes that also say, tachlit ha'yediyah shelo nida, which is very surprising to find a quote from Plato flowing through in a Hasidic book. But okay, there is one thing which, by the way, and I don't really want to get hung up on this too much, but there's one thing that absolutely separates us from the ancients, and that is that the ancients had confidence in the fact that they had a working model of the universe, which was so true that if you knew this, it would set you free. Okay, and we have no such confidence in any kind of model of the universe, because our science is eternally evolving, and yesterday's certainty is tomorrow's disreputable theory, and so forth and so on. So our sciences are never really solid enough that you can say, aha, I know the truth. Okay? Which would be like a real problem for anybody who's, let's say, trying to be a contemporary Rambamist. Okay, because the Rambam was very firmly rooted in this Aristotelian, pre-modern scientific view of the world, and his science no longer is plausible. Okay, so what the Rambam would do if he was alive today, I have no idea. It would be amazing to ask him. Right. But anyway, yeah.
I think the converse of it, though, the people like in ISIS who don't have good coming out of them, and they're not going to be becoming or striving to be good. They're going to be striving the opposite way, which isn't even included in this.
Well, so here's the thing. This was also alluded to. The religious wars between Christianity and Islam that dominated the Middle Ages. Okay. What's the status of this? And Yehuda Halevi put the phrase into the mouth of the philosopher that, look, running around killing other people to get them to worship God one way or the other is simply not acceptable. And of course, it's certainly not acceptable to the philosophical model, since there is no way that God wants to be worshipped. Do whatever works. And they didn't say do whatever makes you happy. They said do whatever works in your cultural context. So you had to be, you had to be sensitive to try and create a culture that had justice and rationality. As many people as possible should be able to attain knowledge of the truth. So a culture full of chaos and death and mayhem, kind of like, post-apocalyptic Mad Max kind of thing, is not a functioning culture according to this model. You have to have a model that actually cultivates human development and human thriving. Okay? And if your culture doesn't do that, then you simply have an objectively bad culture, which you need to ditch or reform or do something to it. But if your culture is established on a certain mythology, and your culture is therefore just and harmonious, okay, there's no reason to worry about whether God wants me to, whether God wants me to, shall we say, as the Rabbi say, slaughter from the front of the throat or slaughter from the back of the head, okay, because that's all cultural, whatever goes in this culture. So in a certain culture, it might be symbolically cruel to chop an animal's head off from the back if you want to kill it and eat it. But for some reason or another, slaughtering from the front, that looks humane. Well, if you want to stand up for humane values, then you'd better, in this particular culture, okay, slaughter from the throat. On the other hand, you could be from another culture, okay, that views slaughtering from the throat as inhumane because, look, it takes so much longer for the animal to die. Just take an axe and chop its head off. Okay, well, okay, either way is fine as long as you're cultivating this capacity for compassion and trying to mitigate cruelty. That's the ultimate goal. So, anyway, I don't, because time, so I really don't want to get, because we've said all this so many times, okay, but the problem with Christianity and Islam, as far as the Kuzari puts it, and I think this is fundamentally what lies behind it, is that the Kuzari says, listen, if you don't have Judaism telling you that God fundamentally wants human beings to do this or do that God is fundamentally involved in human life, and Judaism is the only thing that gives you that, and it gives that to you through the experience that Jewish people, or through the experiences that the Israelites had of leaving Egypt, of experiencing miracles, so forth and so on. If you don't have that experiential truth, which is not universal because it happens to people at a particular place and time, and if it doesn't happen to you, it doesn't happen to you. Okay, so exactly how do you get it is a different question, but fundamentally it's very specific and localized. It's not a universal truth, right? And therefore it casts no universal obligations on other human beings. Okay, so no one other than Jews are obligated in this thing. Okay, now the people who have come and tried to take that core and use it to establish a universal religion are therefore doing something that's fundamentally incorrect, right? Because you can't take this and make it a universal church, or make it into the universal religion of Islam, which all human beings must accept, or else. So it's the universalism, okay? Because if you really followed the universal path, you would never harm another human being in order to promote a religious belief. All right? But if you already misappropriate the Jewish experience, or the Israelite experience, to be more accurate, if you misappropriate that core and you try to use it as the hook to hang a universal religion, you will end up invariably killing people that you don't have any reason to kill. Okay, simply because your assumption is that if God wants us to worship Him by praying, by getting down on our knees in a cathedral and receiving Eucharist, and that's what the Lord wants. And if you're not gonna go along with the program, man, then you're better off dead. So I'll kill you. All right. Or alternatively, God thinks that people who pretend to eat corpses and drink blood are nuts. Instead, bow down to Mecca 5 times a day and we'll kill you if you know, or at least we'll have a big war. I mean, the question of whether Islam really espouses killing people who are functionally monotheists but have a different set of beliefs that are not Islamic. Okay, you know, it allows them to live amongst an Islamic culture with as long as they accept upon themselves to pay their jizya, their head tax, and to occupy a lower social level than the Muslims. But all the religious conflict, in fact, my reading at any rate of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi comes from the fact that these other two religions have basically misappropriated something that doesn't belong to them, and you take an experience which you didn't have, but you interpret that experience as being some sort of universal thing, which it isn't. And then when something that arises out of experience becomes a universal thing, then go conquer the world with it. Right? And what actually should happen is that if you have a concrete experience of the divine in some way, which is relevant to you and ultimately relevant to nobody else, okay, so then you can tell the story, and if somebody decides to get on board with the story because the story touches them, so that means, well, I guess the story is meant for you. The way that Chazal said this, as we all know, was that when Abraham and Sarah were not having babies, it doesn't mean that they were being abstinent. All right? They were having plenty of relations. Okay, but what's born from these relations? I mean, you can't have the Abraham and Sarah, the great tzaddikim that are copulating, right, but they're having sex. Okay, but there's no progeny. There's nothing coming out of this. There's no, these yichudim are not doing anything. So basically, the sages said, well, listen, they're propagating the souls of all future converts. So future converts are considered to be the children of Abraham and Sarah. We all know this. But fundamentally, the point is that if you hear the story and it elicits from you a commitment, that means this story, for some reason, has always been meant for you. This is your story, right? Now, as we're going to see, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi takes a pretty radical or kind of an extreme position in terms of, can a convert ever become the same thing as a full red-blooded Israelite? Okay. And his issue about the inyan he'eloki, the divine experience. I mean, still haven't figured out how to try to translate that one. The divine something, is really where he explains, what the nature of the experiential religion comes from. We know the experience has the ability to rewrite axioms. And not only does it have the ability to rewrite axioms, it also has the ability to rewrite reality. Which is why in Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's concept, and not just in his, the crux of the experience is that it touches upon the miraculous. If there's no miracle, then there's something missing, which is also part of his criticism of Islam. Islam is really very not miraculous. There's no miracle stories that I know of that are attributed to Muhammad. Okay, just he's the prophet, and how did he? But without miracles, how did he prove himself? Well, good question. He proved himself because the Quran is so beautiful that it has to be divinely inspired. There's no way. This got to be the Word of God. It's so beautiful, and of course, it's only beautiful if you can appreciate classical Arabic. So. So there you go. That I think is kind of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's dig at the idea of thinking that you can take the individual, the specific experiential core of a revealed religion and turn it into something universal. You can't, because in any event, if your proof is that in the beauty of the thing that is revealed, and nobody can appreciate that but Arabs, then you can't convert the world to something that nobody can know but you. But they do it anyway, because because the whole tendency of both Christianity and Islam is to universalize the specific, which brings them to acts of war and violence that Israelites with the exception of, let's say, the wars under Joshua, you know, with that exception, we don't really have much of a concept of milchemet mitzvah. And this is a long speech. It's, you know, if we were doing Sefer Dvarim, we could go into it. You know, we don't have a mitzvah. It's the Rambam holds that yes, the Rambam actually has a sense that we have a responsibility to do jihad. They're going to have to edit that out of the recording, you know. But you know, we're supposed to fight and have wars in order to convert the non-Jews to the 7 Noahide commandments. That's the Rambam. That's the Rambam's concept. But doesn't seem to go la halacha, and there's a Ramban that disagrees with that, and that's really the consensus of Jewish tradition, at least as far as I know, is that whatever, you know, the best wars to fight are wars for defense. Number one, there's no good war to fight. Let's start with that. And if you're going to fight a war, let it be a war for, you know, let it be a defensive war. That's definitely a melchemet mitzvah. Sometimes there are wars that you can fight for political gains or for you know, to increase the empire. That's a milchemet reshut. And by the way, ancient Israel wanted to have an empire. You know, that's what a successful nation did. You were a successful nation, you had an empire. Right? If anybody doubts that, you can, you know, check out the second chapter in Tehillim and see all about the Israelite empire. Whether it ever happened or maybe it's still going to happen, but it's definitely an empire type thing. But even there doesn't seem to be any great need to change the religion of the people that you're conquering. You know, you're conquering them to add them to your empire, but they're entitled to go about and continue doing what they've been doing as far as their religious commitments are concerned. And the Ramban, at any rate, finds this to be entirely legitimate, and I think Rabbi Yehuda Halevi would agree, because if they never had the experience of coming out of Egypt, they don't have the divine whatever, you know. So what can you expect of them, right? So Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has been going into kind of demonstrate what it means, this divine whatever, right? And he begins by giving you a hierarchy of whatevers, right? So the first whatever, I guess I'm just going to stick with that, you know, ha'inyan hativi, the natural whatever, okay. So for that, he basically ascribes that propensity to plants. Okay. Now we know, you know, living things have all sorts of processes which they do. They're not passive. Okay. And we can't, you know, we can't really define what life is. At least Rabbi Yehuda Halevi didn't think that he could, which is why he calls it inyan. It's a matter. It's a subject. It's an experience. It's a kind of realization. And so you have the natural inyan, okay, the natural whatever, which involves ingesting, growing, and reproducing on a plant level, and then you have the vital whatever, which involves moving about and desiring and intending and having senses that are both internal and external. And all living creatures have this. Okay, and then the third level is the intellectual whatever, which gives us our capacity to know. And once again, this is also kind of like left entirely undefined. Okay, but it's a separate level of life or existence that rides on top of two others. Human beings have got all three levels. You have your basic your basic life functions, just staying alive, which basically is eating, excreting, reproducing, you know. And then you have on that the more vital elements, the more active elements of life. Then you have on top of that the intellect. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's claim is that these three things are not, they do not flow into each other. They're completely discrete. So in his mind, and I think this is pretty plausible also. You know, it's very, very hard to imagine that there should be some evolution that takes a plant with its plant-like form of life and morphs that into a living creature that moves with its kind of, the distinction is so, it doesn't mean that evolution is impossible from his point of view, but at some point you're going to cross the divide, which is very, very stark. Okay, and you simply cannot reduce each inyan to, you can't show that the inyan, that the vital whatever, okay, is in some way an extension of the natural whatever, or that the intellectual whatever is really just an extension of the vital whatever. Even though in anthropology and all that, that's really the thing that they would be trying to do. They'd be trying to talk about how human consciousness evolved out of whatever was there on the savannah beforehand. Okay, but the problem with that always is that there does seem to be a very substantial gulf between all these things. Okay, and I'm just going to say one other thing about what I think the whatever is. All right, that's kind of a question that's hanging in the air. So that's the elephant in the room. What is the whatever? What is the inyan, which Rabbi Yehuda Halevi never tries to define? Okay, so I would put it based upon where we are as moderns and a little bit of dubious quantum physics thrown in there, and say my feeling is that each whatever is kind of a field. I don't know if it's a field of what, a field of energy. A field of shared reality, a field of shared experience. By the way, there's a botanist called Rupert Sheldrake who actually works with this idea. He's considered extremely controversial in the world of the sciences. Like he's had his YouTube videos taken down. Okay, it's hard for him to get a hearing. Because he's considered to be peddling snake oil as a scientific theory, but for me it's always seemed to be very plausible. Plants have a shared kind of experience, which is why they even communicate with each other. I mean, one thing that they've discovered recently, which simply boggles the mind, is that trees in a forest communicate with each other. How? Imagine this. Through a gigantic network of fungus that underlies the floor of the forest, to the extent that if you have a tree that's in trouble somewhere over there, the other trees of its own species can send it nutrients, and also trees are kind of a little bit nasty too, because if you have a sapling growing in a place where that is different than the other trees can also kill it. Okay. But at any rate, so life is a network. Life is a shared experience. It's not just one tree in isolation. It's one tree among, it's one tree in the forest. It's one human amongst humans, and so the first thing that the field does is that the field allows for the exchange of information in some way or another. But you can only have information transference when you have a certain pre-existing kind of empathy between one form of life and another, which, by the way, may exist between species. That's not, that happens on occasion, but it certainly exists much better between species. Like I'm now a proud owner of. I'm not the owner of the dog. It's my son's dog. But boy, am I learning about dogs, and how dogs connect to other dogs, which is okay. Or now cats, by the way, famously do not connect with other cats, except in various specific circumstances. But once again, that's also a shared trait. I mean, so cats know this about each other. It's not like cats are hungering for empathy. But okay. So
have you seen lions? Have you ever seen a pride of lions?
Oh yeah, well, yes, I have.
I sure do.
Well, that's true. With lions, I mean, I was just basing this on my experience with my son and his cats, which he had like 10 cats, and Yeah, Moshe. Moshe was the cat whisperer of Moshav Tekuma at one time. Another element of the Inyan Ha'eloki is that it has to do with the relationship of the parts. A body that is alive is integrated with its other parts. The body shares information with, so the brain is communicating with the toe is communicating with the brain, everybody's talking to the liver, and there's this, so it's chemical information, but it is absolutely information. And this information also exists within a network of some sort of empathy, sympathy, some sort of relationship that exists between the different parts of the body. If you didn't have that, then the body would simply die and fall apart, which is exactly what dead bodies do. Also, fundamental to life and any of these things is a sense of past, present, and future, which is itself so how does that work? Obviously, if in order to be alive, you have to have a sense of where you're coming from and where you're going. If you don't, then you won't eat, or you won't excrete, or you certainly won't reproduce. So this unification of past, present, and future is pretty fundamental to being alive, I think, and I think that's in the matrix. It's not that's not in the material per se. And lastly, I think we're going to have to forego that lastly, but it's okay. All right. So if you this inyan is something like a field, okay? You can think of it as a magnetic field if you like, and it just pulls things together. The gravitational field, a magnetic field, and this is also a field. One of the things that you get out of this, of course, is that the relationship is much deeper than the individual part. Which brings us to humans, and the midrash that every time, when you stand underneath a chuppah and you get married, you're entering into a situation where the relationship between the two of you is more real, more substantial, and more meaningful than your individual cells. Because the individual cells can fall out of love the next day, and hate the whole relationship and wish they'd never done it, but the relationship stands. That's a revelation that comes from a higher source, And if you work the relationship positively, this I think in a Torah point of view is what transmutes you into eternity, because the relationships are forever. It's the individuals, it's the individual bodies that are transitory. Okay? But in any event, so each one of these inyanim that we have reveals a certain kind of, it expresses itself in a certain kind of set of relationships. In precisely the same way, I think that if you played a piece of music, you're using notes to express something. So there's the song, and then there's the notes that make it up, And you can actually take away the notes in a way and just be left with the song, and I'm going to stop talking while I'm ahead. But anyway, I think that's where Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is coming with this, and finally he's going to introduce us to the idea of the Inyan Ha'eloki. Now, based upon everything that I've said so far, the Inyan Ha'eloki is going to look very much like the possibility of a relationship between God and humanity. In the same sense that a body this body is held together by a relationship between its parts, and we're all held together by a shared experience right now. God is connected to the world and to people, at least to some people, through a network of shared experience, and that's the Inyan Ha'eloki. And the Inyan Ha'eloki is going to tell you stuff that you can never get out of the. Okay. So let's say going back to 37. So the Kuzari asks the king, okay, now that we've explained, the intellectual You know what? Intersubjectivity. Yeah, maybe that's the best kind of intersubjectivity. I would just, say, Rabbi Hood always says inyan, and I got to come up with intersubjectivity. So 10 syllables. Okay. So then the rabbi asks the king. So what's the level that's higher than this? And the king scratches his head and says, well, what is higher than the divine than the intellectual intersubjectivity? What's on a higher level than that? And he kind of says, well, I guess it must be very, very, very smart people. Okay. So to which the rabbi responds is, no. I'm looking for something. I'm looking for something that is substantially divided from the previous. I'm looking for a leap. But what goes beyond the intellect? What is there? So I'm looking at something that separates its possessor in a substantial, in an essential way. In the same way.
Can I ask a question
Yeah,
before
sure.
we go on? According to the Kuzari, then, he's throwing out this word, scholars.
Scholars.
Yeah, so well, at least that's what I have here, what word did you use, the chachamim?
Chachamim. Yeah, chachamim are wise people.
No, I know what that
Okay.
means literally, but I'm just saying, from the Kuzaris, how's he looking at how we define chachamim?
Okay, so I think quite simply, he's defining chachamim the way that the philosophers have always defined chachamim, people of intellect who are committed to knowing the truth with their minds. Okay, so scholars is a terrible word.
Yeah,
It's a terrible translation because it really has to do with wisdom, and so the best way to translate chachamim is simply what they are. Chachamim gdolim are very, very wise people. Okay, as opposed to just standardly wise people, I guess, and so what transcends the intellect? Well, if the intellect is wise people, then what transcends the intellect is extremely wise people. All right. So the rabbi says, no, that's not going to cut it, because I'm looking at something that distinguishes the next step past wisdom from everything that came before it, in the same sense that kihibadel hatzemach min hadomem, in the same way that a plant is differentiated from inanimate matter, kihibadel ha'adam min habehema, as a person is substantially different or essentially different than an animal. Ulam, however, hahibadlut b'ravo b'mat, if you're going to distinguish based upon more or less of a certain capacity, then this has no boundary. Ho'il v'hi havdalah mikrit, it's not an essential distinction. Ve'inam madrigal derech ha'emet, and therefore it's not really a level. It's not really a true level on its own. Okay, it's not a level in the way of truth. So like let's see, the difference between a plant and a rock is a really substantial. That's a gap. That's a very, very deep canyon. The distinction between an animal and a human being. Once again, today we have a tendency to argue this, like an animal rights person, but basically, what human beings have generally believed to be true over the centuries is that there is a substantial gap there between humans and animals. Okay, so we're looking for something that is going to distinguish its possessor in the same way that those big gaps distinguish one level from another. And if it's just a matter of adding more or adding more wisdom or taking away wisdom, that is not a substantial. That's not an essential distinction. That's just, how would you say it's al derech hamikra, it's happenstance. This person happens to have more of it, and this person happens to have less of it. It's like money. Some people have more, some people have less, but they're still both human beings, and everybody got some money in their pocket.
Sounds like a lot of hubris too, right?
That you were
to assume that the
the next level.
Yeah.
or that the next level is substantially different.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, that's his core argument. And the king says to his imkain, if that's the case, en ba'olam hadvarim musagim b'chushim madriga lamala mimadrigat ha'adam. If we're talking about stuff that I can visually see, I can't see anything that goes past the human intellect as being the watermark or the litmus test for what it means to be human. Okay, there's nothing higher than humans in the visible world, and therefore there's nothing higher that I can conceive of than intellect.
That's what I mean. Sounds like a lot of hubris. The Kuzari's response.
Oh, I can't see anything higher than that.
Does that sound?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, but I think it's forgivable because frankly, none of us generally have any kind of experience with anything that is other than human, unless you claim to see angels. So,
Right.
okay, and by the way, angels were considered part of the part of the scaffolding of existence. So they didn't doubt that there were angels. Just simply said, that's why he says within the visible realm, I don't know of anything other than. Okay. So now here comes the kicker. 41. Let's say you find a person who walks through fire and doesn't get burned, who stands for a long time without food and doesn't become hungry, and whose skin shines with a light that you can't stand up against, that overpowers you. He doesn't become sick and he doesn't become weak to such an extent that when he gets to his final days, he will die intentionally, the same way that a person gets into bed to fall asleep on a certain day and a certain time. And above all of these, he will know the secrets of what was and what will be. Would you not concede that this level is essentially differentiated from the level of regular human beings? To which the king replies, Amnon Ken, yeah, I would agree to that. That level, if it actually exists, is a divine angelic level. Okay, now actually I have a footnote here on the bottom which says to look up the Rambam's commentary to the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, to the introduction to the chapter that deals with the issues of Olam Haba and whatnot. But anyway, and it says this reality is not within the purview of the intellectual intersubjectivity, nor the vital one or the natural one. It is within the purview of the divine intersubjectivity, the divine matter, the divine whatever. And then the rabbi continues. En elakim achadim mita'arei oto hanavi. These are some of the attributes of the prophet, who no one argues with his prophecy. And to him there was revealed to the great masses of people something of the connection between divinity. Davar hitchaber ha'elokut bahem. It was revealed to them that divinity is in fact connected to them, and he informed them, or it informed them, that they have a master who leads them as according to his will, and according to the level that they serve him, or alternatively fail to serve him if they deny him or rebel against him. So the master will respond accordingly. This prophet is the one who removes the curtain from the past when he informs them how was the creation, how did people relate to each other, and how did they relate familially? What's the yachas? What's the relational lines, okay, of people before the flood to Adam, and how the flood was, and how 70 nations relate back to Shem, Ham, and Yefet, the sons of Noach, how the languages split up, and how human beings settled down afterwards, and how did the various forms of work and labor get invented, and how were the cities built, and the years of the world from Adam HaRishon until now, how many there were. Okay, so now the truth is that the only human being that actually embodies the Inyan HaEloki according to the Kuzari, there's only been one, and that's Moshe. Okay, all of the others have not been quite the same. Certainly not that massive dose of the miraculous. His talking about having luminous skin that nobody can bear to look at and all that. That's all Moshe. And Moshe ultimately is the one who actually allows the people to see. He takes a whole bunch of people out of Egypt, and he allows them to perceive and know, because once again, prophecy is a kind of shared experience. You share the Inyan HaEloki is not just me; it's the people that I'm with, even though they don't necessarily get it the way that I do. But it still is a shared social experience. Okay, that kind of rides on top of the intellect of the people. Okay, so they always say that those days that you spent from going out of Egypt until Matan Torah is 49 days of Sfirat HaOmer that they needed to end in order to be ready for Matan Torah. Okay, so what's the difference here? Well, if you prepare yourself for Matan Torah, what rules are you following in order to do that? Okay, what processes are you undertaking in order to ready yourself for Matan Torah? And if that means that I need Torah in order to receive the Torah, then where did the Torah come from? A little bit of a conundrum there. So the answer here is pretty straightforward. Okay, is that they were using whatever intellectual capacity they had. Intellect they had. Okay, and people knew stuff. Okay, and they had traditions from the ancestors and whatnot. So they were able to use this in order to get ready for Matan Torah. But Matan Torah is the moment at which it really becomes absolutely positively clear. There is a God. God has a relationship with me. He's connected to me. He wants things of me. He wants me to, he wants me to believe in Him and to eschew all kinds of idolatry. And that's the fundamental principle of the entire Torah. It's God exists, and nothing else is worth worshiping. And that's the core insight. So when this is shared with the people, okay, through Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy, then you have the establishment of Israelite religion, which now utterly transcends. It arises in part out of the actual physical experience of being a slave and being liberated. That's definitely part of it. Okay, but once again, not sufficient, because the experience of the Inyan HaEloki is really the thing that's been drawing them out of Egypt from the very beginning. And we have this, in the Psukim. The sign, at least on the surface, the way that the Psukim work is that Moshe asks God for a sign, and Hashem says to Moshe, "Well, here's the sign that I sent you. You'll come back here and worship on this mountain." Okay. Well, what's this? I'm supposed to convince people using that? And I said, no. It's the nature of, there's something that is destined to happen here, which is actually the thing that reaches back into time and makes the whole liberation from slavery happen. So here also, by the way, time becomes a very, very important thing, and this is, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is building up to this, because in his mind, one of the really, really, really important things that the Inyan Eloki gives you is a sense of time. I can count back to the beginning, and maybe, he doesn't say this explicitly, but it's at least presumably reasonable, I can count forward to the redemption. Okay? And this ability to connect to the past and connect to the future, that's the crux. I mean, he's really going to emphasize this. As a matter of fact, all the miracles and all the stuff, he's been building up to this, to get you to the point to see that because we have the Inyan Eloki, we can trace time back to the beginning. We can trace time forward. We know where we are within the narrative. Okay, and okay, in my edition, there's a little line between paragraph 43 and paragraph 44. Okay, which is I think completely appropriate, because here we're taking a tack slightly different. Up until now, we've been talking about, showing that there is such a thing as Inyan Eloki, showing what it would be like if it happened, and then saying, well, guess what? That's what happened to us. We encountered the Inyan Eloki. Right? And now, sidebar, okay, the Inyan Eloki, one of the things that it does, very important, is that it opens us up to a sense of time and continuity. We know where we are in the narrative of time. And time has a beginning, and presumably, although once again it doesn't say this explicitly, has an end. Right. And now the king says, okay, well, this is a little odd. We should be stopping right about now. You guys really have a confirmed count that goes back to the creation? And the Chaver says, yes, we certainly do. We count our time from the creation of the world. And there is no argument about this point between Jews from the land of the Khazars to the land of Ethiopia. Now, all Jews have this standard counting from the time of creation, which means that this counting has to be the product of the activity of the divine something. And we're going to touch upon this next time, but basically he goes on to say that if this wasn't the Inyan Eloki unifying all the people and showing this to be absolutely true, this time frame, then no human being would ever be able to concoct it. Because the minute that I tried to say, well, let's start counting time from the day that that Muhammad ran from, you're gonna get into arguments and conundrums and stuff like that. Okay. You just can't hoist this on people. Okay, so therefore there must be an Inyan Eloki, there must have been a Mamad Har Sinai. Okay, and Moshe drew the curtain from the past and from the future. And therefore, we all share as part of our, shall we say, social DNA, this sense of time and continuity, and that's why all Jews share the same time frame, no matter where we're from. Okay, so that's his argument. And that's where we're going to stop.
Good question. Is
Yeah.
that also the main premise of how Pirkei Avot starts? The chain, the passing on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of the reason. I mean, the real thrust of Pirkei Avot, by the way, is to take the it doesn't do very much with the time frame itself. It doesn't give you dates, but it definitely gives you the continuity between the time of the Tanakh, which is fairly well documented and timed, with what comes afterwards, which is much less well documented and timed. But there is a famous Braita called Seder Olam Rabbah, and that really is the official summary of the time frame of history up until when it was written. And after that, we've just been counting by the same Seder. Seder Olam Rabbah is a Braita that is attributed, I believe, to Rabbi Yossi. Yeah, so it's pretty old and it's very authoritative. And let me turn off the